The Hook, the man who walked away from wealth. What does it mean to own everything, yet desire nothing? Imagine having billions at your fingertips, mansions scattered across continents, supercars idling in glass garages, a life that most of humanity can only fantasize about, and yet choosing to give it all up, choosing to sleep in hotels, to carry your life in a single suitcase, to walk the streets not as a titan of finance, but as a ghost of excess. This is not fiction. This is the life of Nicholas Berggruen, hailed as the homeless billionaire. A man born into privilege, a mind sharpened by wealth and culture, yet haunted by an emptiness so vast that even fortune could not fill it. While the world worships money as the ultimate salvation, Berggruen dared to challenge the illusion. He turned his back on luxury, leaving behind a palace of glass and gold, trading it for the transient existence of a wanderer. But why? Why would someone who possessed the keys to the world's pleasures voluntarily walk into a life most people fear? Detachment, transience, rootlessness. Was it enlightenment? Or was it madness wearing the mask of wisdom? Psychologists have long argued that wealth can both liberate and imprison. The hedonic treadmill teaches us that human beings adapt frighteningly fast to pleasure. That car you dream of, within months, it becomes background noise. That mansion you fantasize about, soon it's just another cage with bigger walls. For Berggruen, wealth became noise, not music, and so he abandoned it. But underneath this decision lies a darker truth. Humans are wired to seek belonging, territory, and roots. When Berggruen gave those up, he broke one of the most primal contracts of our species, the need for home. To be rootless is not just a lifestyle, it's a psychological gamble, one that risks dissolving identity itself. Nicholas Berggruen did not simply give up luxury, he gave up anchors. And anchors are what keep us sane. As we unravel this story, we will descend into the psychological labyrinth of a man who had everything and chose nothing. A man whose decisions force us to ask, is freedom the absence of attachment or the absence of meaning? CTA, SEO optimized. If you found this story haunting, you won't want to miss what comes next. Subscribe to our channel and dive deeper into the hidden psychology of power, wealth, and the minds that dare to reject them. Turn on notifications so you never miss our dark explorations into the human condition. The heir who refused the throne. Nicholas Berggruen was not born into obscurity. His father, Heinz Berggruen, was a celebrated art collector who built one of the most valuable private collections in the world. Nicholas grew up surrounded by masterpieces, Picasso, Matisse, Klee. His childhood was drenched in the silent power of beauty and wealth. For most heirs, this would have been a golden ladder into an effortless life of privilege. But for Nicholas, it was a gilded cage. From an early age, he saw wealth not as liberation, but as weight. A fortune can feel like a curse to those who inherit it, because it strips away struggle, and struggle is the forge where identity is made. Without it, life can feel hollow, predestined, and painfully predictable. Imagine a game where you already know the ending. That was his inheritance. Instead of clinging to the family empire, Nicholas turned away. He pursued finance, building his fortune not by relying on the art his father collected, but by sharpening his mind in the ruthless world of investment. He was brilliant, disciplined, relentless. His hedge fund multiplied wealth until he stood among the financial elite. To the outside world, he had become the perfect archetype of success. Rich, respected, free to indulge in any desire. And yet, inside, something gnawed at him. Psychologists call it existential vacuum, a state described by Viktor Frankl, where life loses its sense of meaning despite material abundance. It's not suffering that kills the soul, it's the absence of purpose. For Berggruen, every million earned was another reminder that money could never answer the question, why am I here? So he began to strip his life down, piece by piece. First, the real estate. While his peers competed in a grotesque contest of mansions, yachts, and private jets, Nicholas began selling his properties. By 2000, he had no permanent residence. By 2002, he had shed almost everything. His life fit in a suitcase. His wealth remained vast, but it was no longer visible. It existed only in numbers, while the man himself wandered, almost ghost-like, through hotels, borrowed apartments, and temporary spaces. To the outside world, this seemed like madness. A billionaire who lived like a nomad, who rejected mansions in favor of anonymity. The media nicknamed him the homeless billionaire, a paradox so bizarre it became a brand. But to Berggruen it was not madness. It was purification. Here lies a profound psychological twist. When humans voluntarily embrace what others fear, they gain power over it. Fear of homelessness, fear of rootlessness, fear of losing status. These are primal anxieties that control society. By discarding them, Berggruen became untouchable. Nothing could be taken from him because he had already given it away. And yet, detachment comes at a cost. Philosophers might celebrate freedom from material chains, but psychology reminds us that identity needs anchors. When you own nothing, you risk becoming nothing. Who are you when you are no longer defined by your possessions, your roots, your territory? Nicholas Berggruen walked willingly into this void. But the question remains, did he find freedom there? Or did he dissolve into emptiness? The philosophy of emptiness. The image of Nicholas Berggruen carrying his life in a single suitcase was more than eccentric minimalism. It was a manifesto. While his peers worshipped accumulation, he preached detachment. While they built empires of glass and concrete, he drifted through temporary rooms, speaking of ideas instead of possessions. To understand this, we must look beyond economics and into the psychology of asceticism. Throughout history, men have renounced wealth and power to pursue wisdom. Monks abandoned kingdoms, sages refused crowns, philosophers lived in poverty while reshaping civilizations. But their sacrifice was clear. They gave up material comfort to pursue a higher spiritual truth. For Berggruen, however, the lines were blurred. He did not retreat into a monastery. He did not seek poverty. His billions still grew quietly in investments, untouched, abstract, invisible. What he renounced was not wealth itself, but the performance of wealth. He shed the stage of materialism, keeping the script of financial power. Here lies the contradiction that makes his story so haunting. True ascetics stripped themselves bare, but Berggruen remained wrapped in an invisible armor of privilege. He could afford to wander because he knew he would never starve. He could walk away from mansions because at any moment he could buy another. His suitcase lifestyle was freedom, but it was also a game only the rich could play. This paradox creates psychological dissonance. On one hand, his rejection of materialism is admirable, even inspiring. On the other, it feels like a performance, a carefully constructed myth, the billionaire who needs nothing. Society loves such myths because they soothe our own conflicts with money. If even the rich can live without luxury, perhaps wealth itself is not the solution to happiness. But was Nicholas seeking enlightenment or escape? Some psychologists argue that his detachment may not be the mark of a sage, but of a man haunted by emptiness. When someone who has everything still feels nothing, detachment can become a form of survival. By rejecting possessions, Berggruen may have been rejecting the reminder that they never satisfied him in the first place. His life became a meditation on impermanence, each night in a different bed, each day without roots. No trophies, no walls to fill with his father's paintings, no anchors. To some, this is liberation. To others, it is exile. And yet Nicholas was not entirely alone in his search. He began to build what he called a life of ideas. Instead of collecting houses, he collected thinkers. Instead of chasing possessions, he chased philosophies. This pursuit would soon take him into the realm of power, not measured by wealth, but by influence, an arena where ideas shaped nations, and where his strange lifestyle became both his shield and his weapon. The thinker who bought influence. After shedding his possessions, Nicholas Berggruen did not fade quietly into obscurity. On the contrary, he reinvented himself as something more dangerous than a billionaire collector of mansions, a billionaire collector of minds. In 2010, he created what became known as the Berggruen Institute, a global think tank designed to gather philosophers, economists, political scientists, and leaders. Its mission sounded noble: to rethink governance, society, and the future of civilization. But behind the mission was a fascinating psychological twist. Nicholas had abandoned ownership of things, yet he still craved ownership of meaning. If wealth could not give him identity, perhaps ideas could. Psychologists call this symbolic immortality, the human drive to leave a mark, to create something that outlives us. For most, this comes in the form of children, careers, or cultural contributions. For Berggruen, it came in the form of shaping thought itself. He didn't want to be remembered for the mansions he never lived in. He wanted to be remembered for rewriting the script of society. But there was something unsettling in the way he pursued this goal. Unlike philosophers who suffer through poverty and obscurity, Berggruen could simply buy his way into the intellectual elite. With billions at his disposal, he could convene the greatest minds of his generation, finance global dialogues, and position himself as a modern philosopher king. His nomadic existence was not one of weakness, but of control. By owning nothing, he made himself untouchable. By funding ideas, he made himself indispensable. This raises a disturbing question. Was Berggruen truly a seeker of wisdom, or was his renunciation just another form of power play? By appearing detached from wealth, he gained a mystique that ordinary billionaires could never achieve. While they flaunted cars and palaces, he flaunted nothingness. And paradoxically, that made him more intriguing, more respected, almost saint-like, in a world obsessed with consumption. Yet beneath this aura lies the psychology of control. In politics, as in finance, influence is the true currency. Berggruen understood this. His institute did not just gather thinkers. It aimed to shape policies, to guide nations, to redefine democracy itself. He positioned himself at the intersection of philosophy and power, wielding ideas as weapons cloaked in the humility of a man who needed nothing. But what happens when detachment becomes strategy? When the rejection of possessions is less about enlightenment and more about creating an image immune to criticism? If Nicholas owned palaces, he would be just another oligarch. But by rejecting them, he became untouchable. A myth, a riddle, a man beyond the reach of ordinary judgment. And still, the question lingers in the shadows. Was this the path of a man liberated from desire, or the path of a man who discovered a darker form of ambition, one that hides not in gold, but in ideas? The mask of detachment. The world called him the homeless billionaire with fascination, almost reverence. Media outlets painted him as a monk in designer clothing, a modern Diogenes who wandered not with a lantern, but with a suitcase full of silence. Yet behind the myth, cracks began to appear. Critics argued that Berggruen's renunciation was nothing more than a performance, a carefully cultivated illusion. After all, he was not truly homeless. He did not taste the despair of those who sleep under bridges, vulnerable to hunger, violence, and indifference. His homelessness was curated, protected by the invisible shield of wealth. Each hotel bed he slept in was still purchased with money, each journey cushioned by privilege. To call him homeless was, to many, an insult to those who suffered the reality of destitution. This paradox reveals a darker psychological truth. Sometimes the more we reject something, the more powerfully we are still chained to it. Berggruen could not stop being a billionaire by choice alone. He could shed mansions, cars, and art collections, but the reality of his wealth remained intact. His detachment was not destruction, it was disguise, and that disguise gave him a terrifying advantage. By renouncing the visible signs of wealth, he escaped criticism aimed at the ultra-rich. While other billionaires were accused of greed, corruption, and excess, Berggruen stood apart, almost holy in his refusal. His lifestyle became a shield that protected him from the anger of a world suffocating under inequality. Yet psychologists warn of a deeper danger. When identity is built around emptiness, it risks collapsing into nihilism. By giving up anchors, Berggruen embraced fluidity. But fluidity without roots can dissolve into meaninglessness. He spoke of ideas, of reimagining governance, of reshaping civilization. But was this pursuit driven by authentic vision, or by the desperate need to outrun his own void? The human psyche is not built for detachment alone. We crave belonging, connection, home. When these needs are denied, the mind begins to fragment. Some turn to addiction, others to obsession. For Berggruen, the obsession was philosophy. Not philosophy as a quiet pursuit of wisdom, but as a battlefield where he could wage war against emptiness. He did not meditate in silence. He gathered councils, think tanks, institutions. He turned his lack of roots into a kingdom of ideas. But even a kingdom of ideas can become a prison. When every night is spent in a different hotel, when every relationship is fleeting, when the self refuses to be tied down, what remains? A man who owns everything yet chooses to own nothing. A man who could live anywhere, but belongs nowhere. A man admired for freedom but perhaps haunted by exile. This is the mask of detachment. Liberation on the surface, but loneliness underneath. Freedom from possessions, but also freedom from roots. To the world, Nicholas Berggruen looked like a philosopher king, but in the shadows of psychology, He looked like a man endlessly running, from wealth, from attachment, perhaps even from himself. The ghost of wealth. Nicholas Berggruen stands as a paradox that unsettles both the rich and the poor. To the wealthy, he is a threat, a reminder that their mansions and empires may mean nothing, that the trophies they cling to can be discarded like dust. To the poor, he is an enigma, a man who possessed what they long for yet abandoned it willingly, almost mockingly, as though their struggles for survival were toys he chose to put down. And therein lies the power of his myth. Berggruen forces us to confront the ultimate question: what is enough? If even billions could not satisfy him, what chance do the rest of us have of finding peace in material things? His life becomes a mirror, reflecting our own hunger back at us. Some see in him a sage, a man who transcended greed. Others see a hollow figure drifting endlessly because he could not bear the weight of attachment. From a psychological perspective, his story is not just about wealth, it is about identity. Humans construct themselves from roots, a home, a community, possessions that symbolize permanence. Strip these away, and you are left with fluidity, a self in constant motion. For some, that fluidity is freedom. For others, it is exile. Berggruen embraced this exile, turning his homelessness into a kind of performance art, a rebellion against the tyranny of things. But rebellion, no matter how noble, does not always lead to peace. The chilling truth is this: Nicholas Berggruen may have freed himself from possessions, but he did not free himself from the human condition. Emptiness follows him like a shadow. No matter how many hotels he checks into or how many thinkers he gathers under his institute's banner, he remains a ghost wandering the corridors of both wealth and philosophy, never quite belonging, never quite at rest. And perhaps that is the lesson. Not that wealth is meaningless, nor that detachment is salvation, but that the pursuit of meaning itself is endless. For Berggruen, the streets were never about poverty. They were about escape, from mansions, from illusions, from himself. Yet in that escape, he became trapped in another prison, the prison of rootlessness. So when you hear the name Nicholas Berggruen, the homeless billionaire, do not picture a man who defeated desire. Picture instead a man who walked willingly into the void, carrying nothing but a suitcase and a hunger that even billions could not silence. Because in the end, that is the haunting truth. Wealth can buy anything except meaning. If this story unsettled you, then you are exactly where you need to be. On this channel, we dive deep into the dark psychology of power, wealth, and the human mind. Stories that reveal the shadows behind success and the ghosts that haunt even the strongest among us. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover more hidden truths that the world would rather keep in the dark.